With this, I would like to welcome Andreas. Andreas, you're joining us from Malmö today, or you're somewhere in the area?
I'm in Malmö, yes, the center of Malmö.
Okay, great. Andreas is here to present the initiative of the building industry in Malmö, namely LFM30 or LFM30, which presents a local roadmap for Malmö for the year 2030. And Malmö, Andreas is a specialist and an architect for sustainability at White Architects in Malmö. He's the leader for the Southern Network of the Sweden Green Building Council, and he has also a PhD from NTNU and is a representative of LFM30. The stage is yours, Andreas. I'm happy to learn something more about this project and for you to share with us.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to this exciting forum. I'm really happy to have been listening in to all the great speakers and the very knowledgeable experiences on how to take the next step. How do we jump from less bad to doing good? This is a great challenge and something that we in practice struggle with in our everyday life. And a part of that journey I would like to share with you today with the work that is being done in the local roadmap Malmö 2030. I would also like to add that I do not have a PhD. I haven't defended my PhD from the university, but thanks for sharing my experience from the research institution. Today I would like to first of all go through the work that is being done in local roadmap towards fossil-free city of Malmö 2030. The local roadmap is 15 years ahead of the national roadmap, and it's an initiative developed by the commercial actors in Malmö together with the city of Malmö. Then I will go through some of the criteria and how we move towards climate positive buildings. And in addition to that, the contract that has been signed by the commercial actors also include how to turn the businesses into climate positive businesses. And then I will end up with some practical examples of how the criteria are put into practice with a report on the built environment in tune with nature and climate. Today there are 160 members in LFM30. The representatives from the entire value chain in the building industry. So it's not only buildings, we are also including infrastructure and roads and other installations between the buildings. We have come quite far in the development of criteria for buildings, but have started to work on how to set up criteria and calculation methodology for all that is happening in between buildings. And that is an exciting journey and a great opportunity with this constellation where we do have all the value chains represented. There are also 38 of the members who are developers, and developers have a great responsibility in the contract, as they have promised to start up one climate neutral building before 2025. The roadmap is based around a time frame of 10 years. It's a very short amount of time for great change. In 2025, we are supposed to be half the way, which means that we use the time now to document and identify the climate impact from the individual work of the organizations and companies that are engaged, but also on the portfolio. And we have promised to minimize the impact based on the emission targets that we have identified in relation to the emissions that every organization has at the moment. And then achieve net zero in 2030, and in 2035 we are to compensate more than the emissions we have in the portfolio, so that we have a climate positive impact. The roadmap is ahead of the legislation. As Pia mentioned, we have legislation from the authorities that will come into practice this year, in the start of 2022. We are forced to document the CO2 emissions from the new buildings, but we will not have an emission target, which means that there's not a demand to minimize the impact. We just have a demand to document the impact. But in the LFM30 commitment, we have set a target for emissions, a maximum emission targets based on typology, and that will already come into practice now. So with the efforts that are being done to calculate the emissions from the building industry, we then use that to find ways and strategy to minimize carbon towards the emission targets. We are also looking into balancing the emissions, and we're very fortunate to have the Noll CO2 certification scheme to build upon, and we have a very good dialogue to find ways to balance out the emissions, and as defined in the LFM30, we are looking into negative emissions and focusing on net negative emissions, so that we see that the carbon from the atmosphere are brought down into the ground and stored, either through CCS projects or through investments in renewable energy in combination with energy storage like CO2, but also in relation to biosync projects, planting trees, binding biogenic carbon built into our projects is also something that's accounted for as a balancing strategy, and using biochar in landscaping projects. In relation to the portfolio, we also start to calculate refurbishment projects and get LCA calculations for refurbishment projects and additions to existing building mass. And this is a very important strategy, and we are very happy to have a calculation methodology for that so that we can compare projects and do improvements on that as well. We all know that we have to focus on what's already there and enter the circular economy in an efficient and large-scale way. And by setting up criteria for the refurbishment projects and infrastructure projects as well, we have a complete picture of the built industry and can start to set targets for that as well. And in the contract, all the organizations have promised to decrease the emissions from the entire portfolio, which is the major part of the work that's being done in the local roadmap to give guidance on how to minimize all of the projects from the emission rates of today towards net zero in 2030. And we follow the procedure of 5 steps. First, calculate emissions, and all the participants are now set up the first calculation of their own portfolio, and based on those calculations, we make improvements. We learn from each other and share our experience, and then we achieve a production of new buildings below the maximum emission targets, and that is then balanced out so that in order to have an LFM 30 certified building, you have to achieve the maximum emission targets. And then there's a follow-up through the building's lifetime. The CO2 budget is set up for all the projects in a very early stage, and that is refined during the process, during the building's lifetime. So it becomes a plan for how to meet the goal of net zero carbon during the building's lifetime. The building's lifetime is set to 50 years as the standard LCA methodology, where we see the emissions from embodied carbon in blue and the balancing, or in yellow, and the balancing out of the emissions in blue so that we find a balance over time. The maximum
Andreas,
yes?
Andreas, you have a good minute left.
Yes. The emission targets are set to small scale buildings, 2 floors, 190 for the heated floor area, the multifamily housing 240, and office buildings 300. And this target is very ambitious, which means that in practice, it's as of now only buildings with wooden frame that achieve those rates, which means that it has an impact in the building industry that changes towards actual reduction in emissions. And here are some more information on the criteria that you can find on the web. And then I would like to finish the presentation by showing some of the important mapping of the emissions from each organization. We have promised to deliver documentation of the emissions from the entire companies, which means that the reduction is not only for the buildings that are produced within the city of Malmö, but it's also a reduction in terms of the entire portfolio of the companies. Here's an example of the climate budget documentation, where we have a comparable way of documenting the projects and a good overview over how to achieve climate positive buildings already now. And this we bring up to the master plan level, so that we want to see a climate budget not only on building scale, but also on the master plan level. And the learnings that we have had so far in the Råängen project for the cathedral in Lund is that the energy system there is already 100% renewable, which means that the emissions from operation are not 50% as we often see, but very much lower in that condition. And the embodied carbon becomes very, very important. And the reduction of the embodied carbon is something that we have to work with in order to achieve the ambition of the climate positive environment. Another example is
Andreas, can you maybe move to the end, because we don't have any more time left? We're already 1 minute over.
All right. The experience is that we need to focus on the existing building mass, look at the energy interaction between buildings, and have an efficient utilization of waste heat, so that it's the interaction of buildings that's important. Build as many new buildings as we can with structure in wood, and bind CO2 in planting trees, and we have to involve the user to reduce the energy consumption of buildings to minimum. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Andreas. We have one quick question from Carlo asking if there are any financial incentives from the government in LFM 30.
I did not understand the question. The incentives from the government?
Financial incentives from the government, if there are any for LFM.
Yeah. No, we have support from Vinnova and SBUF. So it's an economical organization founded by the commercial actors themselves. So it's the commercial actors that contribute with their own time, and we have applied for research funding.
Okay, thank you very much, Andreas. We can maybe continue this discussion later in the discussion session.